Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we have an all-new host of games to chat about for our grab bag. Before we get into our feature of the week, which is going to be celebrating Resident Evil's 30th anniversary in a way that, only we know how, which is running through our top 10 Resident Evil games. And so, you and I, naturally being massive fans of Resident Evil, we always relish the opportunity to kind of like run through our favorite picks. This time it's going to be a top 10 and, they keep making them. It keeps throwing a wrench into whatever our previous lists were. So I'm happy to have the chance once again to see where our lists are falling.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first did it, obviously in the first ever episode, we hadn't had Village, or we hadn't had Remake of 4 and obviously Requiem, so could be different. I also haven't gone back and double checked what I said back then either, so
And I suppose once we get to the lists, we'll divulge the stipulation about whether we're talking OGs or remakes or whatnot, but we'll get into all that mess after the break and once we get through our grab bag. But before we chat about some of the games that we've been playing over the last week or two, a bit of housekeeping. Everyone should make sure that, once you, of course, listen to this episode in the next few days, if you choose to go back and listen to some of our older episodes, be sure to come back, though, on Thursday for a brand new installment of Horror Bites, which has gone bi-weekly because of my scheduling snafus, no fault of Neil's. We had, fallen behind slightly on a week's worth of Horror Bites, but have no fear. We'll be back with a brand new theme that Neil picked for March and going into next month. That being the theme of Sometimes Dead is Wetter, which is, you guessed it, our aquatic horror theme for Horror Bites. So be sure to tune back in on Thursday where we cover 2 aquatic horror themed bite-sized indie horror games that we both ended up being quite big fans of for very drastically different reasons. But Neil, in getting into the grab bag for this week, what would you like to chat about first of what you've been playing? Either something we both had a chance to play or something that you had experienced on your lonesome.
Well, let's both start with the 2 games we've played, I guess. Let's go with a small one first. Let's go with Crabmeat because we were lucky enough to get review code for this as well. So yeah, thank you to the PR for that as well, because it was a nice treat to get in that regard. So yeah, Crabmeat, to say it is a short horror game. Could have been something we had on Horror Bites, but given we got a code, it's nice to sort of bring it here for this one. It is a survival horror type game. It's more of a point and click way of doing things. So while it is a game in a 3D space where you have some movement, you basically click to move in each place you go. The story of it is that you're this prisoner who's basically, I assume it's a dystopian thing. Your sentence is that you have to basically go crabbing for these priceless king crabs, like to pay off a debt to what's it called, the feudo state, I think it is. And so you're basically doing crabbing. You're on a boat, enduring all the things of that, going through the routine of all that, and in between, sort of exploring the boat, and things, well, they go wrong, don't they? They go very, very wrong, and we start getting some very fucked up crab-based imagery. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at screenshots of it, or even like videos of it, like it looks like a first-person sort of like actiony game, like very survival horror, as we said. But because it has that sort of that point and click style to it, it kind of adds a nice tension, I found, like to the fact that you don't have like complete control over what you're doing. It's in a novelty sort of way, it felt very much like going back to tank controls, where
Mm.
you have some abilities, you have some facilities, but to use them is a tad bit laborious. It's when we talk about horror bites in the next episode, is we had a game like that where it's very rudimentary control set, very click on this, click there sort of thing, move, and that's it. This is a little more sophisticated, but yeah, it's a cool story in that regard, though. Like having this idea of, oh, you're just going crabbing, but you have this backstory of like, you're a prisoner for your debts, and this is the job you get given. And yeah, it looks like a harsh, unforgiving job. But yeah, as the game goes on, you start to find that there are threats to your ship, basically, and you've got to man all the different things to try and fight back against these threats. And yeah, it's some really weird, freaky kind of aquatic horror stuff. Yeah, with crabs. Yeah, it's they're a fascinating creature to look at anyway. Like king crabs, have always fascinated me in just how they look. So anything like that, those really spindly, spidery sort of crabs as well. Uh, they really do make quite an interesting sort of thing for a horror game. And yeah, I think that like the icy sort of thing about it, with the location, um, it's that sort of workplace horror in a very dystopian sort of way,
Mm.
but also with that sort of aquatic horror madness where it does go to some slightly unexpected places. I don't know if the point and click stuff always works for the kind of game it's trying to be, but it makes it more memorable anyway, I find. Well, what about you though? How did you end up feeling about this one?
Yeah, as a New Englander that is very accustomed to just like sort of uh, crabbing culture, if you will, and whatnot, and just like being somebody that spends a lot of time on the coast and like small fishing towns and communities. This sort of like atmosphere here, I think, is really great. At the same time, like it captures this notion of like you're going out to sea and you're on your own kind of a thing. And like it really
Yes.
does. I think the dystopian aspect of it all, because I think the whole premise is like you pay off your debt in this set amount of time. Otherwise, the toxins that get injected into you will release
Yeah.
and will basically like kill you. And so, like, the dystopian aspect of it, I think, is a smart, if it might not be the most original sort of like premise because of the fact that it adds an extra sense of urgency to everything that you're doing. And I think that the game really like emphasizing the fact that it's a crabbing sim for the first chunk of the game, right? And then the more overt horror, survival horror elements kind of like kick in. And I think that that's like a smart angle to take here. At the
Mm.
same time, to your point though, about the movement of it, given the sense of urgency, I found that the point and click nature of it, which is very much akin to how you move in like VR games, the fact
Yes.
that you have to, you hover and highlight over the area you want to, and then you teleport. But here, you quite literally have to click, and then you do this little scuttle in that direction, and then you have to keep doing that. Like that aspect of it, I thought didn't necessarily meld very well because of that sense of urgency. So I was kind of a little bit put off by that. But I think that overall, like the game, which takes about, I think, 2 to 3 hours
Yeah.
to get through, like it has a nice progression from the intensity of you just being in this role of a crab or fisherman type of a role, and then the urgency that takes with like keeping your ship intact and manning all of this incredibly dangerous equipment. And then naturally it ends up with the horror, which is that these monstrous spider-like crabs end up running through the halls trying to kill you, and that's when you got to break the glass and get that rifle or shotgun. And it's like one of those things where it kind of just like escalates in a very nice way. But I think sometimes getting there was perhaps a bit too laborious. And
Mm.
it's not necessarily fair to this game, but as someone that spent way too much time playing Dredge, I would just
Mm.
rather play something like Dredge than this, to be honest. I'm not a huge sim person, so like the realism of actually being a crabber doesn't do a whole lot for me other than maybe my appreciation for the authenticity of replicating the sort of like tools that you have to use and the things you have to be wary of, lest you want to, fall into the icy waters of the Arctic.
Yeah, I think I can see the intention of the play style being,
Mm.
the other hook of this is like you are on a semi-automated ship, and
Yeah.
as a result, you are the only crew member, so there's
Mm.
no chance of any help or anything like that, which makes it feel very isolating. And there's no real mention of your skill level in any of this, so
Mm.
you're basically just being thrust into this job. And in that sense, with the whole situation, it makes sense that the controls are unwieldy because everything should feel a bit alien, a bit clunky and hard to do because it's an impossible job, in so many ways, in terms of the location, in terms of what you're being asked to do, and then of course the extra threats that come into it.
Mm.
Yeah, but as always, intention doesn't always mean great execution, which it's fine. I like the idea,
Mm.
more than I maybe like it in practice, I suppose, in that sense. But I do like the atmosphere it builds as a result.
Mm.
I think an Arctic's game, as well, and it's just, oof, it really does just feel really wintry just to look at, and
Yeah.
like seeing those the sea sort of rising outside the boat, and oh yeah, it's like, yeah, I feel chilly just thinking about it. It's that kind of game. So yeah, like I appreciate what it's doing in that regard in terms of really building a sense of immersion, if you will, into the world that you're in. But yeah, it maybe just needed to be stepped off a touch, like just but I can see why they didn't just go with like a straight up normal, 3D sort of dual stick sort of control.
Yeah.
Um, that you do everything with just clicks of the mouse is quite impressive, really,
Mm.
given how much there is to do. So yeah, it's yeah, I like that. I like this, but I do think, yeah, as you say, it has its problems in terms of trying to make this thing work. Yeah, I found it a good time for what it was.
Yeah, I champion, your appraisal of the atmosphere. It's definitely nails that in a way that you feel like you're watching Deadliest Catcher, one of those shows that kind of like puts you into this hellish occupation and the hellish sort of like conditions of that in a way that is quite immersive. In a way that while I
Mm,
might have said I enjoyed playing Dredge more, I think that this is more atmospheric in a much more intense way that I think again like pairs really nicely with the survival horror nature
yeah,
of gameplay once you get there and just sort of like basking in the reality that before you get the mutant king crabs and whatnot, you could die just as easily before they or if they even do show up. So yeah, I
yeah,
think in that regards, successful what it sets out to do.
exactly. Yeah, that's a good times.
Yeah. I guess what I'd like to chat about next is the other game that we both had the opportunity to play and were fortunate enough for to get those review codes for it before the game was released, thanks to our friends at Play Disgusting and Aaron, who's a longtime friend of the show and frequent guest. I got to play a couple of rounds of this game with him as he was doing his review. That being John Carpenter's Toxic Commando
Mm,
from developer Saber Interactive. This being, the latest squad-based zombie first-person shooter where a group of, up to 4 survivors venture out into the apocalypse and have to fight through a variety of zombies, both the horde shamblers, but at the same time, like special infected. So, being not only fans of horror games, but being massive horror movie fans, and that was one of the first things we bonded over when we first became friends was like our love of John Carpenter, right?
mm,
And John Carpenter being a notable gamer, right? He's somebody that has very much said like his days are being a retired filmmaker are best enjoyed with a controller in one hand and the allegedly bong in the other. And so like him slapping his name onto a zombie shooter that is akin to that Left 4 Dead model and more recently Back for Blood model. I at first didn't really know what to think. John Carpenter, he might be a massive gamer, but the reality is, and he is very upfront in saying so, and he said as much with this, his favorite type of check to collect these days is not for necessarily his creative vision, but when he lends his name, extends his hand, and then a check appears in it.
Yeah.
And, props to him. If you're going to make some of the best horror films ever made, you deserve that sort of, retirement. But it doesn't necessarily like instill a great deal of confidence in me. What did, I think, and why I was excited to check this out was Saber Interactive and their, being at the helm of the World War Z game, which I think is one of the better zombie first person squad based shooters that's been released recently.
Yeah.
Along with, Space Marine 2, which is one of my favorite games that I've played in the last like year. So the fact that they were at the helm of this actually had me quite excited. And I think ultimately what made me come around to this game is that Toxic Commando felt like it kind of like stripped back the aspects of Back for Blood, which I did not care for, which felt like Back for Blood was like a very um, sort of like a Left 4 Dead rendition that was adopting all of this like live service nature of features to it in a way that I felt like distracted from an experience that at its core should just be enjoyable. And it really shouldn't be about like the grind for the best gun, if you will. And I think that for me, in the time that I spent with Toxic Commando, both, getting to play it with Aaron, but also even just like playing on my own, this was a game that felt like it stripped back the core gameplay. At the same time, maybe there were some features of like a hero shooter here that I felt were unnecessary, but at the same time, like the ways in which you interact and explore with the world was a little bit larger in scope than Left 4 Dead and gave you more options, most notably like vehicles. But I found that like that actually ended up being an aspect that gave me a bit more variety, even if at the end of the day, if you spend, I spent, I think, 10 hours with this game. If I spent another 10 hours with it, I would enjoy my time with it, but it would still hit the same kind of like, I don't know, the same branching off point into something else that I typically experience in that, at the end of the day, you're running through the same objectives. And even if there's a bit more variety here, it doesn't necessarily depart from what you're expecting. What was kind of like your early hours with Toxic Commando like?
Not for the first time. I think, like in terms of like trying to onboard you, it's it's hard to make it interesting, and it never feels like the game you're going to get, which is good in a way because the game you actually get is more of a spectacle. Like that intro mission was just very, I can tell you're holding back, sort of thing, like that in a way, especially given the Swarm engine, which powers obviously games like World War Z and, as you said, Space Marine, too. So knowing that was coming and knowing it was going to have that kind of level of things, I think the best thing about the opening is just teaching you about the vehicle stuff and how that works. Everything else is just like derivative of Left 4 Dead, and that's fine. I think it has been pointed out by more than one person this week that every game that has tried to be Left 4 Dead has missed the point of Left 4 Dead to some degree. But I do think at least when Saber did it with World War Z, it was like, well, no, it at least has some hook to it that makes it interesting, that is very different. And the Swarm engine was the big thing, like that. And of course, that's back here in terms of the sheer number of undead that are on the scene with this one. The story is pulpy nonsense. That's fine. Like I don't expect any world-beating stuff here, Carpenter or not. It's it was always going to be kind of pulpy in that regard. I mean, the style of it is very much like his comics work, that he's done. It just feels like that, which is great because that's what I wanted it to be. The problem with having John Carpenter's name on stuff is many people would have an expectation of it being a certain kind of thing like that, and it's not. It's like, I mean, he probably not the only check he's picking up this year with the Halloween game coming out, even though it's enough to do anything with that one. So, but yeah, I mean, there is that at least attitude and feeling of, his comics work in that regard. So I like that from a visual sort of thing. Kind of reminded me more of Zombie Army, in terms of like being that pulpy sort of take on the apocalypse. But yeah, the vehicle stuff really does add something, doesn't it? It's like it's like from the little things that are different with each one, like the fact that the winch stuff that they introduced quite early on, and like pulling stuff off. It adds like an extra dynamic when you're going through objectives. Like there's, especially when playing with other people, you have this sort of uncertainty about what people are going to do. Are they going to, do what the job they need to do to get to the next bit? Everything's fairly straightforward, so it's not too hard to sort of understand. The only problem with like the vehicle thing is like getting in the right door, getting that's in any game that has like vehicle stuff that is like big and open. There's usually some fiddliness in terms of like getting into a vehicle, and that is something that, especially in the early hours, I think is very, very common. Right? Just like sometimes you're like, well, I don't want to drive. I'm just going to fucking get in whatever seat. Yeah, so someone else do it, sort of thing. Like, which is probably more my problem than anything. But yeah, it's that cool imagery. Dare I say these words? Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Where you had that sort of going through a sea of zombies towards the end. It's like in a vehicle. It's basically like the game of that for a lot of the time, and that's great. Yeah, I'm glad that it's doing that, and it looks fantastic when that happens. I mean, yeah, there's no real substance to it beyond that. As you said, it's very repetitive. I think you've pretty much got the gist of what this game is in like 6 hours. Like you've seen everything really, like you're going to see. And doesn't really surprise you after that. So it's the kind of game that I think, when it comes to multiplayer these days, it's the sort of game that I'll play now and again, like that, and do little bits here and there, just because it's fun to just go and, I'll go into a mission and try stuff, because that's what World War Z ended up being for me. It's like, I probably ended up putting like 50 hours in over several years, just because I do a little bit here, a little bit there, and that's enough. Like, I think if any multiplayer game does that much for me, that's good value. And given this is like not like full price, big budget game, it's like, what was it, about 20-25 quid? And yeah, so
$40 here.
Yeah, so it's really sensible, and that's great. I mean, question it coming out when it did, in terms of like the games coming out around it, kind of feels like it got sent out to die. But yeah, like I think it's good fun like that, and it's got all the things that people who have been big fans of stuff like World War Z will love, I think. And yeah, but I just don't think it's particularly nutritious in terms of anything other than a good hang game. Just play with some people and see what happens. And yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to play with you guys because I was at a wedding that weekend as well. So, but yeah, in playing online with people, it's been quite enjoyable. On my own, it's okay, but it's all about the spectacle, and that's fine. Again, I love that it is these games that Saber make. They really do just lay on the spectacle of it really thick in terms of like that. Which means, so I mean, Space Marine 2 has just gone on to PS Plus, so I need to check that out as well in terms of like the engine and all the gunky goopy stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, Space Marine 2, like I was chatting with Aaron about that while we were playing. I was just like, to see Saber take this tech, and you would think like, oh, well, okay, they're just kind of like going to get pigeonholed with the zombie stuff after World War Z. But then seeing them apply that to Space Marine 2 with the Tyranids, which again, it's like a swarm horde type enemy, but just seeing the ways in which they could utilize that was so cool. And then, coming back to the realm of zombies with that tech, it again, like, is applying what worked so well and like made zombies terrifying in a way that I hadn't experienced since, the first time I played Dead Rising. And you get to see this horde on screen, but here it's like them piling all on top of each other. And, the way that you were talking about Toxic Commando with the notion of like spectacle. Um, I think that that's the best way to describe the strongest aspect of this game, which is like the conclusion. The conclusion to each one of those missions, typically it, abides by a familiar framework of you have to hold off this horde, basically, or you have to protect this item, whether it's some kind of war wagon that's going to get you to the next safe zone, or you basically take a sample of whatever bullshit you have in this game. Like, I didn't pay attention to the story at all, but some kind of bullshit that has to do with the zombies, and you put it in this data analyzer, and then you have to hold off a horde, and it's like the description of the finale is very straightforward, and it's basically the same for each one, but the spectacle of them having this environment, and you just look in one direction, all of a sudden you see 300 zombies spill over this kind of like canyon, and they all just like throw themselves over, just like in World War Z, and then having to deal with that. And you basically have these spare parts that you can pick up in the environment throughout the course of exploring, and then that can be spent on like unlocking super weapon crates, or fixing machine guns, or building like barricades that can then be used to help you. And what I really liked about the sort of finale structure of each one of the missions is the fact that the open world rewards and encourages you to really seek out all of those extra, whether it's spare parts, or whether it's going through and finding various like the special currency of these kind of like growths in the environment that let you unlock unlockables for weapons and things like that. And like, I was talking shit about Back for Blood and the emphasizing of like basically the Borderlands approach to weapons in that game, where you're running through an environment, you find the same AK you have, except this one is red. It glows red, and it's got, plus 10 penetration, minus 25% capacity, some bullshit like that. And so what I liked about Toxic Commando was the fact that, like, yeah, it has some of those live service features, but they're not in game. It's all at the hub world. And like that separation of the two, I think does a good job of like not distracting from just the core essence of the gameplay. You pick a weapon, that's the sort of, role you'll play in combat, and then you just keep it pushing until, you get to the next, the end of the mission. And then if you want to revise your sort of loadout, you can. I didn't particularly find anything about the upgrading and the special abilities that fall into the usual classes of like medic or tech guy, which has like a drone that follows him, or I didn't even mess around with the other ones because I just didn't care enough. But it was just like more routine sort of like RPG character class stuff shoehorned into a first person shooter that didn't necessarily inspire any new facets of gameplay. But I think there's at least one or two game modes in there, or mission structures, that like add a bit more variety. Like there's one where you have this vehicle that emits a shield, and if you step outside of the perimeter of that shield, you're basically dealing with persistent health loss, akin to like the closing circle in Fortnite or Call of Duty Warzone. And like, so you have to, one of you's driving, and then everybody else has to make sure they are following along, but not falling behind, because then, you fall outside of that shield. But to your point, if you spend more than 6 or 10 hours with this game, like there's nothing here for me that would make me think like, yeah, I'm going to keep playing this indefinitely, or whatever, these kind of like routine conversations we have about these types of games. So it's entertaining, and it's a nice distraction. But again, this is very much a flavor of the month in terms of multiplayer horror games.
Yeah, it's video game sugar.
Yeah.
Which is nice in the short term, not going to do anything in the long term, but something you'll probably end up coming back to out of some cruel habit at the same time.
Very well said. What else? What else you been playing?
So it's a while back now, but I did want to cover it because obviously the episode you did with Aaron, I couldn't be there for. But I got to play a demo for a game that's recently got kickstarted called Shutter Story, which is by the developer Frostwood Interactive. It's supposed to come out in Q2 2026. Like I said, the Kickstarter is out now for this. Basically, it's like a a photo deduction game. Like, you're searching for things wrong with photos, but there is a story to it. So it's partly a screen life kind of game where you are just on this computer using this software to look through the old photos. But the crux of it is you're like this teen boy. You've gone around to your friend Eli's house because he's asked for your help and to bring this software, because he believes his family are being haunted. Now he sees things and hears things, but everyone else in his family just kind of dismisses it as him being, having an overactive imagination and like always having a reasonable reaction for why these things happen. I mean, like the minute you walk into his house, there's like a very human shaped stain on the wall, like that, which the mother just dismisses as being a patch of mold, like that they can't get rid of, sort of thing. And there's weird tremors and things like that, and all sorts of stuff. Now, as I said, Eli is like convinced in this that there is something wrong, and the demo basically teaches you how the software works, and you sort of get these things like you get his family photos where he can so he can prove that there is something wrong and they are being haunted by some force. So you get the software, go through these photos, looking at stuff like exposure and contrast and that, and like turning it into negative to see if you can find anything. And these are families from the entire, like from years and years and years of the family, all kinds of things. And you basically do a checklist of like, is it safe? Is it not? Is there proof? Is there not? Like that. And some are really, really obvious when there's something wrong. But in the early sort of tutorializing, you get these bits and pieces of like, examples of like, well, this is what you kind of thing you should be looking for. What's, is something too wrong in terms of like size in the picture? Is there like a spectral shape that you can see somewhere? Like, and what's interesting is like, the game models they use are like that sort of weird pictures where they look realistic enough to some degree, but they also have that sort of waxy quality, and that's kind of unnerving in itself. But like, it works really well, and like the whole sort of screen life setup for this bit is quite a fun thing to use. Once you do like a certain amount in the demo, like there's like a cutscene, if you will, like something that you find seemingly causes something to happen to a family member in real life, and then you do another bit more and something else happens, and like the demo basically ends with like the idea that he needs you to find proof. They still don't believe it despite all the stuff that's happening, but clearly doing this is causing problems like that and making it worse. And it's a really like engrossing idea for a paranormal thing, and like the idea that this family is somehow cursed by some sort of spirit that has maybe been with them for decades, like that. And I think the game basically describes it as hereditary horror, in terms of that. So I can't wait to play more of it. I have to say, like, it was great time, like having this introduced, and I really did want to see more of it and how it sort of plays out.
Yeah, this has been on my radar for a minute, and I didn't even realize the demo had came out. So I'm going to download this ASAP. But it reminds me of the found footage, the 2008 found footage film Lake Mungo, in a way, where you're looking through a lot of these like family photos and videos and whatnot, and you go back and you start seeing like things in the background. It's not just like, oh, there's a ghostly face here or something along those lines, but to your point, like this is the type of experience that seems like it utilizes a variety of analog multimedia. The fact that you can mess with photos and change the exposure and the contrast to potentially expose and find new things. You can look at the negatives of videos and whatnot and see what you can kind of derive from that. But at the same time, camcord videos, and there's also this aspect of navigating the home or whatever environment that you're in. So it seems to be this kind of like ghost story, hereditary ghost story at that, to your point, but at the same time, like getting your sort of like rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty, so to speak, in terms of like actually doing the investigatory piece and not being overly concerned maybe with like, a bump goes in the night kind of a thing. Like, I think that's the type of thing that could just be really interesting in terms of like a ghost story and it being intrinsically tied to like the character's past. But it's also more about like how you interact with these various mechanics to like unearth truths that maybe aren't always haunting related, but they could reveal something again about your like own lineage. So I think that's a really cool sort of like blending of features and whatnot. And yeah, utilizing analog tech, I think, is never not yielded some pretty effective results in terms of like unearthing both the past, but also things that on a first pass you maybe didn't realize were there, but were there all along.
Yeah, yeah. It's like there's a few games like that coming out where I'm looking at it and going, yeah. Like another one was it's also coming out. It's I think it's coming soon. So it's called Imprinted, where it's about sound sort of based stuff, like of like going through like sound documents. It's a similar sort of idea, but basically the story that was like you're a forensic specialist where you're supposed to find you've got this damaged audio that you've got to restore from the late 70s, and but the artist's stuff that you're looking into is like involved in like this occult thing, and she disappears. And yeah, it's looked really fucking cool. Like the idea behind that. So also just yeah, I'm really hoping that one turns out well too. Yeah, there's something about that screen life style horror games. Like it makes sense. In terms of just having that interactivity. We've had a few games in the past like do bits of that, but yeah, like I do like the idea of just like having an effect on a screen like that kind of through the same sort of system you're using in the first place, sort of thing. It's it works quite well.
Yeah, seeing an increase in like desktop horror is one of those things that proves like not only can it be effective in film, but the actual like interactivity portion of it has a lot of potential. So that's very cool to see this like slowly but surely becoming more of a trend, I think, in terms of how it's utilized.
Yes. But what about you? What else have you been playing?
Um, why don't we take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll dive into the game that I've been spending a great deal of time with, and it's a very random one at that, but it's one that I think again, like I was saying to you before we started recording, is one I wish more people talked about because it's a hell of a sequel. But we'll dive into that and more in a moment when we return from our break. And we're back from our break, and the game that I was alluding to was none other than a sequel that, yet again, I will repeat that I feel like not enough people talk about, and it does not get enough respect on its name, considering for the most part, you can't even play the original one, at least on PC. But that game being The Darkness 2, which is from developer Digital Extremes, and it is as anyone that's a fan of comics knows, it's based on the '90s series The Darkness, which was like I think the publisher was Top Cow or something like that. And this was I think the original might have been a PS3 release title, or it was shortly there within released on a PS3 back in the day. And like, again, you can't even play the original one on PC, but that doesn't really matter because I think the sequel is like the perfect example of a sequel that expands and, the bigger and better sort of mythology, not only in terms of the gameplay, but also in terms of like the narrative and the story. And like, I mean, anybody that's familiar with the comics, it's like, yeah, this is one of those series that was like very much over the top. I'd put it almost in the same camp as like Spawn, where it was like, yeah, you basically would buy this every month because of the fact that the art was cool as shit, the story was dumb as fuck, and it was just like a derivative of some kind of like mob body horror demonic sort of narrative. Like I even in replaying the game over the last like 2 weeks, couldn't care less about the story, but I think that like the story though is a good representation of like taking what in the original game was very much just what you see is what you get. It's a mobster. He dies, but then he's imbued with the darkness, which gives him these monstrous tentacles that sprout from his body. And, the whole thing is you want to stay out of the darkness, or you want to stay out of the light, rather, sorry. So that way you can basically use these powers. But if your character, Johnny Estacado, which is like one of the best protagonist names of all time, if he, stands in the light, in various light sources, whether it's street lights, whether it's subway lights, then the darkness basically retracts, and then he can only use his firearms. And naturally, you're much stronger when you have the darkness and you're in the dark, because you can regenerate health more quickly, you're stronger. And so the ways in which the sequel builds upon that is that it not only kind of like bolsters your abilities, but it further adapts this like cell shaded graphical style, and like the combinations of lefty and righty, which you lovingly refer to your tentacles as. They just have like more devastating and creative ways to basically like rip through mobsters and whatnot. So it's like The Godfather meets Hellraiser in a way, almost. Which, as far as a big ridiculous video game premise goes, it's a pretty good one at that. Even if it gets bogged down in a lot of melodrama in terms of like the character and his past relationship, his dead girlfriend who's the love of his life. But even if maybe like it's difficult for me to get super invested, I appreciate that the game introduces also, instead of this like rote sort of mobster narrative, like there's this whole psychological horror aspect. It's like, is the darkness all in Jackie's head? Is it not? And then like you end up delving into this sort of like psychosis of the character in some pretty interesting ways, in terms of like the ways the environments are portrayed in some sequences of the game. So like, yeah, in terms of sequels that don't get enough love, I think that The Darkness is right up there, because the amount of abilities, and again, like the creative bodily harm that you can dole out fairly quickly in this game is really, really entertaining, and just like a bloody spectacle through and through.
Yeah, I think that generation was probably the last generation that had some really bloody good shooters
Mm.
consistently at this level, like a budget and production. And unfortunately, I think it came out just as we were getting into some terrible times for what 2K were doing with their games, and yeah, it was never going to get another one. I think like the first one got overhyped a bit for what it was. I think you can still play it on Xbox, by the way, as well, because I think the backwards compatibility works on it. Whether it's probably available or not, I don't know. But yeah, no, everything about this was like fantastic. I didn't much care for the first game because I thought it was very fiddly, and but as so many games of that era, like the sequels just always seem to be so much better than the original game. Like it just really did knock it out of the park what they're doing. Taking the whole vengeance thing and giving it a new spin with like this new like gang basically coming in and causing Jackie to use his darkness powers again. Just the whole use of light, obviously in this, where it's an obstacle effectively to using your powers. Like, yeah, I mean, and you just feel powerful. Like that's the thing. It's like where it really sort of captures the whole sort of pulpy comic book wonder of it is just in how powerful it makes you feel, like in the game when you're using those powers, and just how everything gets upgraded, the combination with just the weapons and stuff. Yeah, it is such great fun, and it was one of those games where the story, as you said, is not like super amazing or anything, but it does enough to sort of drive you forward and put you in the shoes of like this mobster, who has this power and of two kinds effectively, and having to fight off this organization almost single-handedly with what he has. And yeah, I don't know, it was that, and the kind of game it was one of those games that was so easy to just, I finished it and it was like I was straight back on it, sort of thing. I think I ended up like playing this game through from start to finish like 3 times in a row. Like it was just like when it came out, like, and it was very much one of my favorite shooters of that generation. Like and again, great competition. Like and when you think of like the 2010s and some of the great shooters there were, that's it's definitely towards the tail end of that those glory days. But yeah, it deserved more, as you said. Maybe one day, maybe one day. But given the licensing rights and 2K basically spending all its money on sports and still making Grand Theft Auto 6, at this point, it'd probably be very little chance we'll ever see it happen.
Yeah, and I think that an aspect that you briefly touched upon there, it's not just to what I was saying about like the combat being so satisfying because of the destructibility of humanly corpses with the lefty and righty, or the gunplay feeling even tighter than it was in the original, which I also was not a huge fan of the original game. But it's also just like the enemies themselves are a lot more strategically dynamic. They really lean into like the fiction and the lore of the world. So naturally now you're fighting enemies that are part of this sort of like cultish gang that knows what the darkness is. So you're going to fight individuals that have darkness adjacent abilities. You have these guys that have, whether it's shields, whether it's this like darkness type weapon that allows them to basically rip the guns out of your hand if you're not going to like dispatch them in the way they need to be quickly enough, even down to something like some of the enemies have these massive light sources that they carry with them. And all of a sudden you have to deal with lightness in a way that's a little bit more pressing and persistent because of the fact that they'll follow you around a corner with this big spotlight, basically. And now you have to, shift your priorities in combat. And it was kind of like what you were saying in terms of this being schlock with a budget. And it very much feels like a bygone era of games and whatnot. Kind of like makes me reminisce in a way where it's like we didn't know how good we had it, kind of, because I would love to get a handful of games that had this same type of approach where it's like completely over the top, but it has the budget to back it up in a way that results in some really satisfying gameplay and just like leaning into the features that were there in the original across the board. Because it's not just the darkness powers, but like a big thing about the original game was that I didn't think the shooting was satisfying at all. And here, again, like everything's been tightened up in that regard. Creative brutality is always going to be one of my favorite subgenres of game. And I think that Darkness 2 still stands strong in that regard. Jesus, all these years later, 14 years later.
Yeah, literally just passed. Yeah, nice to see Digital Extremes are still going strong, doing Warframe at this point. The Werner Herzog endorsed Warframe, I might add. But it's like I do wonder if working on BioShock 2 helped as well, like, in terms of like just really refining what they want to do in the Darkness 2.
Sure, I can see that.
But yeah, again, that's probably another reason though, with Warframe being the persistent beast that it is, that we will not see them get to do a different job as it goes. But hey, we can always have the Darkness for what it is. And by the time this episode goes out, we've got like, it should still be on sale on Steam, I think, for like $1.99. So
there you go.
So go get it.
Oh yeah, it's only $3 over here in the States. So
there you go.
And it's Windows and Mac of all platforms. So there you go.
You get it till about the 26th, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What else you been playing before we get into our feature for the week?
So yeah, just a couple of quick points really, because not really horror, but there's some horror-y bits. I was playing Pokopia, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is a Pokemon game by the makers of Dragon Quest Builders 2, which is a firm favorite of mine. It's basically like Animal Crossing style stuff where you rebuild a place to make Pokemon come back. But the plot of it is that the Pokemon have woken up and found that humanity is just nowhere to be seen. Like, why is that? And one of them has this idea of basically, let's rebuild it so that they come back and the Pokemon come back and all that. But as you're playing through the game, you just find all these notes about like some sort of ecological disaster that happened or was going to happen, like that, and how they'd have to leave Pokemon behind and stuff like that. Yeah, it gets really dark for a Pokemon game like that in terms of that. I've not finished it yet, so I don't know the full mystery, but like it is kind of interesting, especially when you go to each area and you see like the state of it and how you've got to restore it like that. It's like it was quite surprising to have a nice hook on that. I mean, like I said, it's a tiny thing. But, like, I think it made it more compelling. I mean, Dragon Quest Builders 2, which was basically using the plot of one of the older Dragon Quest games, like, did keep surprising you like that, where it's like, this game is stupid goofy at times, but also it has like really serious stuff. Like, and I mean, your best mate's a fucking world-ending demon who just he happens to be okay at the minute, sort of thing in that game. But yeah, there was that. And it was a while back again with this, but Hitman, its latest celebrity thing came out around the same time as Requiem. Happened to be Mila Jovovich. And I chuckled when I was looking at like the little DLC pack you could buy, which allows you to play these missions like permanently, because otherwise, like, it's a limited time thing. But they had little nods to like the films she's done and stuff like that. So you had the multipass from Fifth Element and things like that, which is just like a keycard reader thing. But yeah, the first time I played through the mission, like in the limit time version, like I killed her very quickly, so I didn't really get to see any of the story stuff involved in it. Which, if you've seen anything they've done before, like they did a Casino Royale thing with Mads Mikkelsen, where they replay some of the bits and pieces, like they hit 47 getting drugged like that at the poker game and having to go and find the antidote and stuff like that. But this one does actually have some like Resident Evil style Easter eggs to it, if you will, in the plot. That there's this whole subplot of like she's going to infect herself with a virus and then walk around this building, like infecting all the people who are there. But while you're down there, and this is like the secret facility inside this old mansion, and guess what? You go for a room and a laser wall comes up, and so which you can sort of quick time dodge out of the way of thing. So it was like quite fun to see that they ended up having some resi stuff in there, like because I said the limited time thing, you get to do it once, one and done. And I did it as crudely as possible. I dropped a chandelier on her head. But yeah, by letting the story play out and seeing all the things going on in it, the ultimate thing of that is she does go around infecting everyone. You kind of have to contain the situation. Yes, you can basically end up killing everyone. It's basically a sequel to a mission that was in like an earlier game where the same thing's happening, and you are basically just people that get infected, kill it off before it kills everyone, sort of thing. But those little nods at the end towards Resi were like interesting, to say the least. But it's smart timing, and I say as well that the fact they put it out so close to that. But and it was nice to have another celebrity target, and they've got an interesting roster there at this point. From having had starting with like Sean Bean, and they've had everything from fucking Bruce Lee to Conor McGregor to fucking Eminem. So it was, as well as I said, like Mads Mikkelsen and stuff. So it was a fun time.
I love that. That's one of the coolest things about Hitman recently. It's been like this longevity in the most recent iteration, but it's more than just like, here's another map. Here's a new fictional target. Like they're actually kind of bridging the gap between, real people and real aspects of life with this, fantastical murder sim in a way that, like, I don't know. Anytime I've ever seen like celebrities pop up in a game, I always roll my eyes at it. Talk to me about these types of things. It's just like such a cool aspect of it.
Yeah, it is good fun.
And I love the creativity of the kills there within.
Oh yes, it's a forever game. As I've pointed out before, it just keep coming back and finding new ways to have fun with it, and all easy.
I love that. Was there any last minute things before we dive into the Resi 30th anniversary?
No, let's do that. Let's go into these top 10s and see where we stand.
Sure. Do we have any stipulations with our current top 10s that we want to get out of the way first?
Not really. I mean, we could just read our individual lists and then sort of maybe go into details of why we put stuff where we have. So
are we differentiating between OGs or remakes, or are we
Oh yeah,
packaging those two? Okay.
And your favorites in any order,
Mhm.
like that you wish to have them. There's
Mm.
it would drive me mad otherwise. Like,
Yeah. All right. Well, since you kicked up this feature, why don't you want to kick us off?
yeah. So, much of this has been like playing wherever I can. So, like I said, I'll go through my list, and then once we've both done that, we'll explain it. So,
Mhm.
10 is Resident Evil 3 OG. So, yeah, first example. 9, Revelations. 8, Village. 7, Resi 2 Remake. 6, Requiem. 5, Code Veronica. 4, Resi 4 OG. 3, Resident Evil 7. 2, Resident Evil Remake. And shock horror, Resident Evil 2 OG #1. What about you?
Couldn't have guessed that list any better. Yeah, I guess for mine, it's going to be number 10 is going to be, and everyone should remember that I have not played every entry in the series like Neil. But for me, I'm going to say that my number 10 is Resident Evil Gaiden. My number 9 is going to be Resident Evil 5. My 8 is going to be Resident Evil Village. 7 is going to be Outbreak. 6 is going to be Code Veronica. 5 is going to be Resident Evil 3 OG. Number 4 is going to be Resident Evil 7. Number 3, Resi 1 Remake. Number 2, Resi 2 OG. And number 1 is going to be the Resi 4 Remake.
Okay. So definitely some additions in
Mhm.
both our lists since last time.
Yeah.
So I suppose my first question to you is
Mhm.
Requiem not making it in your top 10.
Yeah, I wanted to this is the thing, like I really do enjoy Requiem. There were a few entries here that I included because of one might be nostalgia, but
Oh yeah.
also like I did have a pick in here that I went back and forth on. And or I had two actually, and it was one of those things where I was like, I wanted my list to be reflective also of Resident Evil's taking the occasional swing
Yeah.
in terms of like breaking from tradition. Now, I'm not going to throw what was it, Dead Aim into the mix or anything like Umbrella Chronicles or whatever. But there is a game on my list, that being, something like Outbreak, that I think deserves to be on my list and being a bit lower on my list because of the fact that it threw into the mix a new sort of approach that I think I would have liked to have seen the series kind of like continue with. That being said,
Mm.
um, I think Requiem is a fantastic game. We spent enough time talking about that a few weeks ago about like why I found that was such a great continuation of the Resident Evil franchise. It just
Mm.
happens to be in this case. I wanted my top 10 to like be representative of suppose my experience and my fondness for the Resident Evil series for a variety
Sure.
of reasons other than it being the best of both worlds in terms of like the identities of Resi, which we had chatted about at length a few weeks ago.
Yeah, like I did a comprehensive sort of 30 for 30 list
Mm,
on Game Watcher, and I made that more of a not really just about my opinion, but like, well, what was the impact? What did it do?
mm,
Where was it interesting and stuff like that? Gaiden wasn't that high for me, but it
mm,
was something where I said like, it's a game that shouldn't work. It's on
yeah.
underpowered hardware, but it's doing interesting things. And there
Mhm,
are horror games in the indie space that have taken some of those ideas in the years that have gone since and quite interesting. And Outbreak is again one of those things I'm very fond of. But it was very hard for me to play it the way it was intended.
mm,
So I will never really get to experience it the way I wanted to back then because we
yeah.
didn't really get the full effect of it. And it wasn't really till Outbreak 2 where the solo mode was like there from the
Mhm,
beginning as well, where I really got to play it like properly like
mm,
that. So yeah, no, I think they are still very important games and groundbreaking and Resident Evil's history of like multiplayer games has been so cursed, like in terms of like how well, like when I did that list, it was like most of the first 10 games, last 10 games in the list, like all the failed multiplayer things,
Mm,
like Reverse, like the Resistance, like Umbrella Corps and Operation Raccoon City, and the sort that just don't end up going anywhere. But Outbreak being anywhere near close to that is merely just because, again, it was the potential. It's like it could
right.
have been so much more. Like it really could have, but it was just stuck in a time on a console. When if it had been on PC, it would have been, oh my God, probably would have been, very much in the same way that like No Room in Hell was like something I really like gravitated towards in those sort of PC days, because it was like an online zombie game like that,
Yeah.
and that was a rarity. But yeah, I could appreciate Outbreak in terms of like impact. It deserves more, and it was very nice that Requiem gave us a bit of that as well in terms of bringing back a character from that. Even if they maybe didn't give her the most gracious exit, but like,
I think also like for Outbreak, what I really did appreciate was that that was the one of the first instances where I got to break free from, and this is going to sound harsher than I mean it to, but like the shackles of the Leon Kennedy persona in Resident
mm,
Evil. Love that character naturally, and those various iterations of his journey from becoming the rookie cop to the badass zombie killer that he is in Requiem. But like that was the first instance where I started to like experience more of the Resi narrative with characters that were outside that sort of
yeah,
realm, and like being put into the shoes of a character at times that like had no combat prowess and yet was still a viable option in terms of the framework of the Outbreak games for the various skills that they had. I just found to be such a cool aspect to those games. And as you noted, we never got to play those games truly as they were intended to be, but I still think there's so much potential there that we've
mm,
talked about. And, likewise, I don't think Resident Evil Gaiden, if I was doing a top 20 list or a top 30 list, like you mentioned, I don't think that Gaiden would necessarily be in my top 10, but I do remember that being the first instance where, when I was a kid, I had handheld consoles long before I got a lot of like
yeah,
steady living room consoles, if you will. And
mm,
so, like, to see how they translated it from what I was familiar with the typical Resident Evil survival horror tank control sort of approach, to something that was handheld, and yet that transitional style of gameplay, like, I wouldn't play something like that if it was on a traditional console, but for handheld, it made sense. And it worked really well, I think, for that platform. While at the same time still being somewhat representative of like the core fundamentals of survival horror, even if combat was being presented in a drastically different way, if you will.
yeah, that's fair. I think in that sense, it's like I said, there are some interesting experiments out there in the
Yeah.
Resiverse. It's just not all of them have been at the best time, and sometimes
Yeah.
Capcom just didn't really do the best thing with it. I mean, Game Boy Color had a couple of good ones like that. Metal Gear Solid Gaiden as well was
Yeah.
fucking excellent. Which I think is getting included on the next Master Collection, so that'd
Hmm.
be quite fun to go back to. Um, so another thing I want to bring up, in our rankings, it is very clear about the modern Resident Evil games, with the exception of you having a modern remake at your number one. Of the numbered sequels, we both pretty much agree that Resident Evil 7 is still like the benchmark, I
Hmm.
think, over Village and Requiem. Like, Village is probably lower down than I would have had it had we done like that ranking like a few weeks later after playing it,
Yeah.
and added it in. Um, and I suspect Requiem will be the same for me.
Hmm.
I don't think it will remain at six forever. I think it is just recency bias. And when I was making that big list, and placing things in a more sort of like general feeling, it was like, yeah, there are games where I think maybe the impact shows over years, and
Hmm.
I think seven, in the context of what it does for the series and where it takes it back, and really being like that stripped back, properly Resident Evil classic
Hmm.
Spencer Mansion stuff, like that in a new whole packaging. I think it's undeniable. Yeah, I don't get it's like as you want to call it, feature complete as like Villages or even as Requiem is, but in terms of really just feeling like a fresh start, like something that really like rebooting a series whilst they remaining fresh,
Mm.
it was perfect. Like, and I think it's a game we go back to, and I think the tragedy and the Baker family, as much as Ethan is bland as a character, it was nice to not have someone connected with all that nonsense,
Mm.
for once, who, not directly anyway, who could just be, and yeah, it's always going to have that sort of unique two-game run in this series where it's like someone who doesn't really have any proper connection to the rest of it. Like that is just the protagonist like that. And anyone who hasn't played, sorry, but like a man made of fungus is basically the star of two games in this thing, which again I think is one of the funny things of like Requiem, where they're basically hinting at doing another similar story of like someone who's not really a person sort of thing,
Mm.
like being the protagonist and then sort of wigging out on it. So, I mean, what for you makes Seven like still a standout?
I think that for me, 7, the big thing which you touched upon there briefly is like at this point, and I was even vocal about it when we talked about Requiem, like I'm
Mm,
just not really into again this sort of like overarching spectacle of the shadow corporations and the thriving to like make this serum that either like ends up turning people into monsters or whatever. This kind of whole thing, like the Wesker
mm,
Leon type narrative, which I love the Resident Evil universe. I love these characters, but at this point, and certainly by the point of Resident Evil 7, I was just basically over it.
yeah.
And so for 7 to be the type of experience that like is cognizant and presents the strongest aspects of what I think Resident Evil has always been, but again, like stripping it back and providing an experience that for the majority of it, you don't see the connective tissue,
Mm,
narratively speaking. And also to your point, like it highlights what has always been the core of, I think, the Resident Evil storytelling, which is that it's people that ended up becoming victims, whether by their own hand or just mere coincidence or just like their unfortunate proximity to events that occurred. Like it's a tragic story about the Baker
mm,
family. And I think that while Resident Evil 7, I don't love the fungus monsters that you fight. I think, the monster
mm.
design there is like not very inspired. I do think that the Baker clan are amongst some of the most memorable designs
Yes.
and, bosses in the entire Resident Evil series. The fact that each one of them abides by this inbred monstrosity like bayou sort of a aesthetic, and yet you're not really prepared for their boss fight for either their personal transformation or just the sort of like insanity of their fights. Like the first fight with Jack, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, he's this really persistent stalker enemy, which again is like very classic Resi in terms of Nemesis or Mr. X. But by the end of that boss fight, I mean, that is fucking one of the wildest moments in Resident Evil for me still. Like using a car as a weapon is just like
Mm,
so over the top and ludicrous. But at the same time terrifying because you really don't know what to expect moving forwards. And then, furthermore, once you end up fighting, I forget what her name is, the female, the
Marguerite.
wife. Yeah, Marguerite. Oh my God, she is one of the most terrifying bosses in all of Resident Evil
Yeah.
for me because of the fact that, she leans into the body horror of Resident Evil in a way that is so effective. And, a lot of the heavy lifting might be done not only by the monster design, but also just like the environments. The fact that you're going through these dilapidated swamp compounds, basically that seemingly never end, a series of mazes, and it creates an atmosphere where you're expecting the unexpected because it's just like nobody could live here. And then furthermore, the more you explore it, you're just like finding a new horror every time you turn the corner.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love Resident Evil 7. I think it does a really good job of taking things up, and it gets a lot of credit for going to first person, introducing first person for the series, but um, there's so much more to it than that. I think that the game and the world is designed with that perspective in mind, rather than kind of slapping on that perspective feature. It really does truly feel like it's designed with first person in mind in a way that I think just furthermore makes that one of my favorite Resis of all time.
Yeah, and it's the one that stuck to it as well, because
Yeah.
obviously Villages added third person. Obviously the remakes have been third person, and you can play it in third person the whole way through Requiem now as well. So yeah, it's the game that kind of sticks to the plan, and stays that way. And I think the fact that as PlayStation was sort of dabbling with VR at that point as well, that kind of helped them sort of decide on that. Obviously, I think the first demo for that game was like a VR experience, like to really just nail the atmosphere of that. I mean, don't get me wrong, Village is probably the best of these games in VR in terms of just because of the stuff that it has in it. But yeah, that first time you play it, Resident Evil 7 in VR, and just you get the full scale of the room, it was just like, oh, suddenly it's intimidating all over again, and that's fantastic. And you have to give a shout out on this game as well to the fact that it is bringing back the mystery when you first play it. Because you don't know who this guy is, because you don't know what the connection is to the previous games, beyond when you got that proper demo that came out before the game, where you get that little, there's a helicopter and it's got a familiar logo on it and stuff like that. Like, there's your little hook, and people were going wild with the theories. And that was the greatest thing about that introduction to, before the game even comes out, is people were hyped about what they saw, myself included, and wanted to talk about Resident Evil again in a way that wasn't just like, I really wish they wouldn't do that. Like, it's more back to, oh, what could this mean? What could that be? And yeah, it was lovely to be excited again like that, and it changed everything. And yeah, when the PS5 version came out, it was an easy thing to just sort of go back and play it, and yeah, it's the atmosphere for me. It really does just wonders. Now, I know that in some way, shape, or form, we technically got the same top four, different order, and in one case, different versions of the same game. I mean, your number one is Resi 4, which is my number 4, which is higher for me, I think, than I originally had it. And I was saying only this week, I've really come to terms with my feelings on that game, from the past, because we've had the future and we've had the turnaround in the series, and I appreciate the game so much more. I think remake's very good, but I think there's just something very polished and fantastic about that structure of the original game, which the remake doesn't mess around with too much, but it expands in interesting ways. But the shape and size for me at the original version. But what made you pick remake over the original in this one?
So I'll start by saying, I talked to you, I think it was last week, or just I had talked to you off air about my rebooting, Resi 4 remake. And, the one thing that I really miss with the remake is the fact that it doesn't have that classical Resi 4 look to it. Like, there is something that's lost, I think, in the remake, in terms of like it being this very gorgeous, highly polished, visually speaking, sort of like remake, right? Which is obviously a part of all remakes, but I really miss that sort of like oppressive atmosphere that I think comes across with the original because of the graphical style. And just sort of like there's something there. It's just like it's slightly uncomfortable. It captures maybe something akin to like the Euro horror vibe that we talked about a lot when we chatted about Code Veronica for the anniversary last year. Now, that being said, the reason that I still went with the remake despite that is that I find that all the additions that they made and the changes that they made to gameplay are things that are implemented that feel like seamless in their inclusion. They feel like features that, again, you come back to this thing of like, if they were able to at the time of its release, this is the type of thing that they would maybe want to include, or be a byproduct of gameplay. And, I think overall for me, they were able to make what was already a really tight experience that much more rewarding, I think. And the changes that they've made to gameplay, in terms of whether it's like the environmental structure or the pacing, some of the environments, they have these new little sections like early on. Once you're going through this like farm section, now all of a sudden there's like this windmill, and there's this huge barn, and there's like a new heavy type enemy that you fight, this like big brute guy that's got a bull's mask and a sledgehammer that he swings around. Like, those are the types of things that are different and are notably different, but they feel like an extension of what is already there. And for me, those are the types of inclusions that, I'm sure purists maybe don't love some of those things, but for me, it just feels like an extension of what was already the groundwork that was there. And when you're adding new combat threats, or you're including like the new cave system that's tied to the lake. Once you defeat whatever that monster is when you're in the boat, you get to go through this cave system, and there's like some new puzzles or some new combat stuff. Like, all of that feels like an extension of a world that I was already so enamored with that I don't mind. And I think like the pairing and the knife system we would see would become, that was established in the Resi 2 remake. And here it just feels so natural. Some people might say that makes it easier when you deal with like the chainsaw enemies, because, essentially if you can time your parries right, it's not an auto kill from them. But at the same time, I think that it just makes certain systems more dynamic. Like, I have one more example and then I'll move on. But like in that opening, when you get to the first large village, right? And it's basically like you just are trying to survive by the skin of your teeth until the church bell rings and then all the enemies leave to go to bingo. There's a section of that where, you can scurry around behind some of the other cabins that I never had done before. And this time in playing through the remake, if you run behind one of the cabins enough, actually the chainsaw guy appears, you get a cutscene, and he starts severing limbs, and all of a sudden that all this like wooden beams fall over and collapse, and now that's one less sort of like escape route that you have, which I'd never experienced the first time. So like it just makes an experience that much more dynamic, both in terms of enemies, combat, puzzles, but also in sort of like how the environment can be shaped by the flow of combat in a way that I think, again, just like it makes it not only one of my favorite remakes, but it makes it my favorite Resi game.
Yeah, that's understandable. I think for me, the original, I just like the pacing of it. It's more compact, and it's in much the same way like stuff like Dishonored 2, where it's like it's the right amount of size that I've played enough that I will then go and play it again, obviously with the new game plus stuff and things you can do effectively in terms of item carryover. It's really compelling, and you just want to keep going and going and going. And so the extra stuff kind of feels a bit bloaty for me in Resi 4 remake. Like, I do like the mercenary stuff. I think that turns out very well. Like that's really very Moorish in terms of doing that. I don't think we'll talk about Resident Evil 2 because we've done that this year already and many times in the past. But I think the game that really like grows a lot in my estimation in recent, like I said, I played so many of these games again in the last year, was Resident Evil Remake, which I think you've got at number 3 and I've got at number 2.
Yep.
And I just, the more I play it, the more I appreciate what it is, because it's the last game that looks great and still feels like Resident Evil did, like that. And as much as I really enjoyed going back to Resident Evil 2 and 3, like the OG versions that were on PlayStation 5, they are still very much like better because they have like these quality of life things like the rewinds and the save any way you like thing that makes it a bit nicer to play. Like that, it takes a little of the stress out and you get to go on a nice trip through memory lane. But Resi Remake is just the purest classical Resident Evil experience that you can have on modern day consoles. Like, I hate to say it, as much as you can love what the original Resident Evil did, for everything, it looks terrible, like at this point, and it plays pretty terribly compared to like even the games after it. Like it's the term aging like seems daft for games because they're products of the time. It's not their fault that everything's changing around them. But at the same time, you look at it year on year and you think, how does this come out 2 years before Resident Evil 2? Like I know games went like crazy at that point. And like so if these days if you've got a remake of a game 6 years after the original came out, it would be looked at very cynically. Like you're like, well, why? But because of how quickly technology changed in that time, like that, the idea of like Shinji Mikami going back and going, well, there's a game I wanted to make out of this, and I couldn't because of the limitations of the time, and then just said, yeah, we'll do it. We'll remake the game. We'll still keep all the stuff. We'll have the pre-rendered backgrounds. We'll have better character models. We'll add all the stuff that we weren't able to put in the original game, and in much as the same way you were saying about adding stuff to Resident Evil 4, stuff that feels like a continuation of what was already there, it doesn't feel out of place, and it feels magical to have like the surprise of it all at the time was amazing, but like just the structure of it still to this day, like it feels so weirdly intuitive. Like the more you play it and get into like how things work. And it's so much less forgiving than modern Resi titles in that regard. You know, it still feels like that sort of classical figure it out jump sort of thing. And which at the time was maddening. But now it's like I like the challenge of it. I like the ammo conservation. I like the really sort of getting you to avoid enemies as much as possible because of the crimson heads. And just those beat for beat moments where they replicate the stuff that was terrifying in 1996, but obviously, as I said, once the visuals started shifting further away from what we were actually getting, they lost their spark. But when you get the spider, when you get Yawn, when the hunters first arrive, like stuff like it's and even the zombie designs, like and fucking Lisa Trevor, all these things just everything is wonderful. And Neptune, I mean, Christ, that whole thing is just like it's so simple. And again, it's like some of the smallest sections in Resident Evil games of old are like the most effective. Like I harp on about Resident Evil 2 and the alligator scene and like how the remake doesn't really do it very well. But like it is just having those small memorable moments with big animals. Something Outbreak games did quite well as well, but they had some really funky ideas for like, what if this was a zombie? What if this was a mutant sort of thing? And you had fucking elephants and giant fleas. It's mad stuff. But yeah, I do love that side of it. Just having that sort of clear, this was an animal, it's fucked up now sort of thing, rather than just like stuff like the hunters where it's like, what the fuck were you before you get into this sort of thing. But yeah, it's just a beautifully structured game. It looks great, it sounds great, it's so atmospheric, and it's so good it's replaced the original game, like in my head. Like no other remake has done that for me. Like because whether it be because I have obviously personal preference, or if it's just down to the fact that the structure of it doesn't work the same way. It's the best one. And I think it and Resident Evil 3, going back to that, were the two ones where I was like, yeah, you know what? There's stuff about this that I had misconceptions about, and for some reason, Resident Evil 3 I might add especially because having played the original version of that again, it feels so much less like DLC for Resident Evil 2 than I remembered, and yet it makes the remake feel more like that. That it should have just been part of Resident Evil 2 remake. But with this, it's so unique, and because it came at a time where remakes weren't a thing really that often. It was a rarity. Yeah, it's just like it's the benchmark to this day of like add everything that was same game, better, more stuff. I know there are people that don't like it for the stuff it adds, but it does just feel like the true director's cut of that game. Like it's just less of a remake than just the true vision.
I mean, for me, like there was really no question in terms of whether it was going to be the remake or the original because of the fact that I came to the original Resi after playing 2 and 3, which I've chatted about at length. So like by the time I got to the original, I had already experienced what I found to be the 2 better chapters in the original trilogy, which is a byproduct of both lessons learned from the original, but also to your point about noting the advancements in just the technology, right? In terms of that jump from 1 to 2 and naturally to 3. I was spoiled with 2 and 3, and so going back and playing 1, I was able to appreciate the fact that this was the foundation of what I would come to find as being one of my favorite game series of all time. But I would describe it as like games that the original being a game I did not necessarily enjoy playing. It felt more like going through the paces for some of the reasons that you had mentioned. And so, when I finally got my hands on the remake, it not only was one of the first remakes that I'd ever really played of a game, but it furthermore showed that like you can shake off the antiquated aspects of older games in remakes and still retain and even evolve on aspects of gameplay there to provide an experience that would surpass the original, not just because of how it looks, but to your point about like the Crimson Head and the Hunters and Lisa Trevor, like these were all again like much for the reasons why I love the Resi 4 remake. These were all aspects that took an experience that I enjoyed, but was able to like provide not only more challenges, but at the same time, just like a smoother gameplay experience, I suppose. That's not a very eloquent way to put that, but just like overall, it allowed me to experience something as what I'm trying to say is it made me feel like, okay, I'm experiencing Resident Evil as people that played the original for the first time with no history with the Resident Evil franchise probably felt. But for me, despite all this baggage with 2 and 3, the remake of 1 really allowed me to kind of like feel like I was experiencing that all for the first time. And those changes that were there felt like an extension of what was already present in the original. And so for, those reasons, that's why that's one of my favorites of all time.
Yeah, and it just comes at that very strange point in Resident Evil history where like Code Veronica has tried to take a step, and obviously struggled with some things because of that, but is very distinctive because of that. And then you get this remake that not only brings back the classical stuff, but looks fantastic because they're using the pre-rendered backgrounds and stuff like that, and with different hardware. I just remember seeing it going, how is this coming out the year after the Code Veronica? And the answer is very simple when you think about it. It's like because it's using a different set of tools, and it allows it to look better as a result. But it is So in sort of wrapping this up and just going over the other things, Code Veronica, we've both had quite high. I had a 5, you had a 6. I think it went slightly down for me just from replaying it. It's like it needs an update. It needs a remake. Like it really does. Like there's flaws in that game that are very much a problem at the time, and really trying to make something different. And it's the black sheep of the family because, like I said, it came after a great trilogy, came just before a great remake, and then the reinvention of the entire fucking series. And so it's just there in the middle. But just the vibes of that game really need to get a modern audience and to get a game that it deserves, like that, because they're not going to really improve that game without reworking it, and so you might as well just do what they've done with others.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I had it so high on my list, and it actually surprised me that I ended up with that as my number 6, because it shares, I suppose, quality with the original Resi, OG Resi 1, in that, I don't necessarily always think like this is a fun game to play because of, again, some of the things that we've detailed when we covered it in terms of like the way that it handles and whatnot is like very much why I would want to see a remake of that before I see a remake of Resi 5 or anything else, quite frankly. But what I think that is undeniable about that entry is that it feels tonally different than the entirety of the Resident Evil series. You know, we chatted at length about it for the anniversary, about the Euro horror vibes of that game. And I
Mm.
think that what that game does so well, and it's also, you know, akin to my love for Outbreak in that, you know, that's a Leon Kennedy adjacent story, and it delves
Yeah.
into the deeper Resident Evil lore with, you know, some familiar faces, but at the end of the day, like it felt for the first time like I was playing a more original tale in the Resident Evil universe,
Mm.
in a way that I actually found came across better than the typical sort of, you know, umbrella storylines. Now, I'm not going to say that it was completely devoid of those aspects, as we know, where the narrative goes and the various characters that are detailed in that game, but I think that overall, like, it felt distinctly different than what I was accustomed to with the Resident Evil games. And I think overall, just like vibe of that game and the environments and the, you know, being trapped on this island with those Euro horror vibes, just like made for a game that was like distinctly different in a way that I did not always associate with Resident Evil. And it's one that, you know, if they do a remake of it, and hopefully that will be one of the next things that Capcom decides to undertake. Like, it would be interesting to see how they take that vibe and how they could expand on it, akin to, you know, their approach with Resi 1, 2, or 4 remakes.
Mm.
They could probably
Yeah.
skip over any lessons learned from the Resident Evil 3 remake, in my opinion. But I would be very interested to see like what they're able to bring to the table in that regard with the Code Veronica remake.
Yeah, no, I think that would be as big an overhaul as 2 was, you know, in
Mm,
terms of like remaking it. It deserves it. But yeah, you're right. Like when a Resi's set on an island or on a boat, yeah, it's for me. I do love those little side tracks we get to go on sometimes. So,
mm,
which, you know, speaking of which, you know, like we both have a boat set game. Yeah, as you mentioned, Gaiden,
mm,
and I have Revelations.
mm,
Yeah, I mean, we talked a bit about Gaiden and what that's done, but and I don't think you've played Revelations, have you,
mm-mm,
at this
not
point?
yet.
No. So, yeah, again, also a portable Nintendo game, you know, from its origin, but later. So, in a way, almost like a spiritual successor to Gaiden, just on much better hardware at that point, on the 3DS. But yeah, obviously you can play on everything now as it goes. But yeah, some of the messed up stuff there with like how it's using the virus mixed with like sea creatures and stuff like that, and it working on people, and just like some of the creepy moments in that game work really well. I mean, you can tell it's a 3DS game, even no matter how much has been remastered. It's like the
Mm,
structure of it is very simple. I mean, if you've ever played the Mercenaries 3D game that was on there, it was like it really did not suit that console at all. Like it was like if you're going to do a Mercenaries game on its own, a 3DS is not really the place to do it. But yeah, there were some ambitious swings on that console in terms of like replicating games. But Revelations, that was designed with that in mind, and you know, much like 4, you know, and 5, it has episodic sort of structure, you know, as well, and
mm,
but obviously in smaller bite-sized pieces, and a whole bunch of weird characters who you never see again in the entire franchise, and you get hunters coming back, and yeah, there's some cool stuff in it, and again, I wouldn't mind that game kind of getting like redone at some point, but I don't
mm,
think it will. I mean, Revelation 2 probably is the better game, you know, because again, episodic structure, but it was made for consoles too to begin with, so it looked better. You've got Barry Burton in it, you've got Claire Redfield in it, and I do like that. And that's, funnily enough, is an island set Resident Evil game as well. So yeah, that there's a fun aside. I think I wouldn't mind
mm.
another Revelations game if we were to do something that is like small chunks, episodically told, bring back some characters who don't get to be in stuff anymore. Like, and yeah, like I don't know, Jill's due a game. You know, it'd be nice.
Hmm.
Like, you give her a fucking game like, at this point. Like,
For
Chris
real.
doesn't have to be back every time.
Right. Well, funny enough, we were just talking about how I haven't played the Revelations games, but I just checked and they are, you can get 1 and 2 for like $7 on Xbox right
Well,
now. I mean, they're
dude,
on
yeah.
Steam sale too, so I'll definitely be picking those up and finally getting to dip my toes in those waters.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a couple of games we'll come back to on a future episode because they are such, in the grand scheme of spin-offs in Resident Evil, and there've been all sorts. I think they are the standout ones in terms of like feeling like Resident Evil games while still being very distinctly their own kind of thing.
Very much so. I guess my only question that I have left in live time is, do I bother playing Resident Evil 0? This has been on my my docket for a minute. It's one that I've never played, and it's on sale as well.
See, again, this falls into the Code Veronica camp of like it's got good ideas that are not really present in other games, and it kind of suffers for them. Like obviously, it does away with inventory, like boxes, and basically you could just drop items on the floor, and you can switch between the protagonists, throughout like that, which is kind of fun, like that. And as a prequel to Resident Evil remake, it's great in that regard. Yeah, it's just a bit fiddly. That's all. But it still it looks like remake, and those ideas are fun. Like so, yeah, it's a good game in the series. I just don't think it's quite as satisfying to play as remake. And yeah, it's like it shows that it was down to who was making what. I think at the time, and remake clearly had like the bones of something there, and this again is one of those games that feels like maybe it should have been a part of the remake. Maybe like there's enough game there, but it's just like it feels like it's padding at times. But yeah, some cool stuff in there. Definitely worth checking out.
Nice. Well, as I said, if anybody else is in the same boat as me, it looks like they're having a whole Resi sale on all platforms because of the fact that the anniversary is here. So who's to say I'm not going to buy the Resident Evil 4 2005 edition again? Because I need that on another console.
Oh God, do I? I mean, yeah. Looking through this only recently and thinking, Christ, I've got these games on how many systems at this point?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, fuck Doom. At this point, I think I got more copies of Resi 4, but
yeah, definitely. Like, I think even on Switch, yeah, I've got it even on Switch. So, but yeah, they're great games. Like I said, and the fact that they're all like £4 a pop, the ones we were talking about. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have to go back to 6, so it's fine. So.
No, I think I'm good on that. I made that decision on my own. That's the thing. Like, last thing I'll say, and then we can wrap. But like Resident Evil 5, I had on my list, and it's not even one of my most beloved Resident Evil games. But I do think that it is an entertaining sort of turning point where Resident Evil fully leans into like ludicrous spectacle, and that is summed up perfectly with Chris Redfield punching a boulder, and there's no more to be said on that. So.
It's the Resident Meme game, it's the game that's got the most memorable lines, and it's got the Wesker Chris confrontation, and it's the best online Resi game technically because of the co-op, because the co-op works like to this day. Like you can go on Resi 5 and probably find people still playing it. Like, I mean, they're probably cheating at this point, but like in terms of certain things, but it's still like kind of cool to play that game in co-op, and it feels so much better when you do, I think, as well. Like, interesting when they do get to that, if they are going to include that again. But yeah, I do like that about it. Yeah, as a Resident Evil game, I like it less, but yeah, certainly as a fun horror action game, like it has its fun times.
You can appreciate a spectacle now and then on this here podcast. So
exactly, yeah,
no
bit of big dumb fun, no problem. Less Chris Redfield would be nice though.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's one of the big takeaways from this most recent Resi breakdown for us is like, break out of your comfort zone with some of this shit. Like, there's a lot more to this this series than maybe we've explored. And just to reiterate for most people, Resident Evil Requiem, I really, really like. If I had an 11th pick, it certainly would have been on there, but I wanted mine to be all encompassing because, as we detailed in our very long episode, which was nice, I haven't had a nice long chat like that in a while. Requiem like feels like the best of both worlds in terms of, Resi's older identity versus some of the new, more modern takes on it. But yeah, so if people want to go from this and listen to any of our other Resident Evil chats, and there are many, Resident Evil Requiem would be a fine episode for people to jump into right after this one. But yeah, as always, it's always a great opportunity and chance to chat about Resident Evil. Never get tired of that, do we?
No. I mean, like I said, we started with the 25th anniversary, and here we are at the 30th. So,
God,
who knows? Will we be here in the 35th debating how suddenly we think Resident Evil 6 is the best one? But no, I don't think so. But
hopefully not. And if that is the case, then maybe that's an indication of the trajectory of the show is taken.
We got to get them listening. What can we say?
Oh my God. You got to do a wellness check on both of us if we're out here praising Resi 6.
Yeah, that might be the sign of end times, I think, at that point.
Oh man, but yeah, we'll find plenty of reasons to keep on chatting about Resident Evil and plenty of other survival horror classics. But I think that's going to do it for us this week with our Resi chat and of course our grab bag. And as always, be sure to check back later this week for an episode of Horror Bites that details our new theme for the month, that being aquatic horror. And yeah, as always, my friend, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at SafeRoomPod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Watch The Toxic Avenger now on Screambox. The radioactive superhero that's certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes is available to watch now from the comfort of your home. Bloody FM listeners get a special introductory offer by going to bit.ly/ToxyFM. That's bit.ly/ToxieFM for a special offer on Screambox.
Sometimes you gotta do something.